What I'm about to tell you happened in the fall of 2009, deep in the Appalachian Mountains. 6 soldiers sent on a routine security sweep. What should have been a simple 5-day mission turned into something none of us were trained for. They found us 4 days later, exhausted, paranoid, refusing to go back. When they asked what happened out there, we told them the truth. They didn't believe us. They couldn't. Because what we encountered in Blue Hollow wasn't supposed to exist. Our equipment had been rearranged while we slept. Our ammunition sorted by hand, 1 round at a time. Symbols carved into trees in a language older than any map. And footprints. Small footprints. Too small to be human, too precise to be anything else. We were being watched, tested, judged by something that had lived in those mountains long before we arrived. Something that didn't kill but could make you wish it had. This is what the military classified. This is what they told us to forget. But you can't forget when you've seen them standing in the fog, watching you with eyes that glow like mirrors in the dark. This is the Blue Hollow incident. And every word of it is true. Before we start the video, hit that subscribe button to support Battleground Stories. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. In late September 2009, we arrived at the Blue Hollow checkpoint deep in the Appalachian countryside near the West Virginia-Kentucky border. The trees there were so densely packed that satellite images appeared distorted. We were told this was a routine security check, a procedure to show their presence following complaints from locals about unauthorized trespassers entering restricted forest areas. I expected to encounter perhaps a few hunters, or perhaps squatters setting up camp without electricity. What I didn't expect was to feel watched the moment we stepped out of the trucks. The air smelled wrong. Not bad, just wrong. Like wet stone and old bark mixed with something sharper, something I couldn't name. My skin prickled before I even unloaded my pack. Lieutenant Mason said it was just the altitude shift. I didn't believe him then. I believe him even less now. The orders came down on a Thursday afternoon. We were a small maintenance and security detachment stationed out of Fort Campbell, pulled for what they called a presence mission in response to complaints filed by the Forest Service. Local rangers had reported unusual activity near the Blue Hollow survey markers, equipment tampering, missing supplies, and what one report described as coordinated interference with patrol routes. The higher-ups wanted boots on the ground to either confirm sabotage or rule out paranoia. Our team was light. 6 men, 3 trucks, enough gear for a week-long camp. Lieutenant Mason led the detail. A West Point grad with 2 tours under his belt, and a reputation for staying calm under pressure. Sergeant Cole handled comms, a wiry guy from Ohio who could pull a signal out of dead air. Corporal Turner was our tracker, raised in the Smokies, knew how to read ground like a book. Private Reed was the youngest, fresh from AIT, eager to prove himself. And SSG, Dalton, the oldest among us, a lifer who'd spent half his career in mountain warfare training. He knew the Appalachians better than anyone, and he was the only one who didn't joke about the mission. We reached the ranger station at the forest edge by mid-morning. The station chief, a thin man named Harlan with graying temples and calloused hands, handed us marked maps without much small talk. He pointed to a cluster of red circles along a ridgeline about 8 miles in. "That's where the trouble's been," he said quietly. "Patrols won't go back there anymore. Not after what happened to Miller's crew." Mason asked what happened. Harlan's jaw tightened. They found their gear rearranged every morning. Packs opened, contents sorted by size. No footprints around the camp. No animals either. Miller said it felt like being tested. He didn't elaborate. Just handed over the keys to the access gate and told us to radio if we needed extraction. His tone made it clear he didn't think we would. We drove in as far as the old logging road allowed, then humped the rest on foot. The trail wound upward through dense laurel and hemlock, the ground soft with decades of rot. Every few hundred yards, we'd pass old survey markers, faded orange tags nailed to trees. Some were missing. Others had been moved, repositioned at odd angles like they were pointing somewhere else. Turner noticed it first. He knelt beside a marker that should have been chest high, but sat low, driven into the ground at a slant. The wood around the nail was clean, freshly disturbed. "Someone pulled this out and put it back wrong," he muttered. "Recently." Mason told us to mark the location and keep moving. By late afternoon, we reached the clearing Harlan had circled on the map. It was a narrow plateau, sheltered by ridges on 3 sides, flat enough for tents and a fire pit. The ground was scarred with old boot prints, some ours from previous patrols, some older. But there were other marks, too. Small, shallow impressions in the mud that didn't match any standard-issue tread. Reed crouched beside one, measuring it with his fingers. "This is tiny," he said. "Maybe a kid's boot?" Dalton shook his head slowly. "No kids out here. Not this deep." We set up camp before dusk. 3 tents in a triangle formation, fire pit in the center, perimeter marked with chem lights. Standard procedure. Cole rigged the radio antenna to a nearby tree and ran a comms check. Signal was weak but stable. Mason briefed us by the fire, calm and methodical. "We maintain a visible presence for the next 5 days," he said. "Patrols in pairs, rotating watch, full accountability of all equipment. If anyone sees signs of tampering, you report it immediately, no assumptions." He didn't say what kind of tampering. He didn't have to. We all felt it by then, that faint tension in the air, like the forest was holding its breath. The first night passed without incident. I took second watch with Turner, scanning the tree line with night vision. The woods were unnaturally quiet. No owls, no rustling, not even the hum of insects. Just the wind moving through the canopy like a slow exhale. Around 0300 hours, Turner tapped my shoulder and pointed toward the supply crates stacked near Mason's tent. I looked through my nods. The boxes had been moved. Not far, maybe a foot to the left, but they'd definitely shifted. We'd stacked them tight, lids flush against the tent wall. Now there was a gap. We approached slowly, rifles up. The crates were still locked, contents untouched. But someone had rearranged them, repositioned each one with care. The spacing between them was even, almost measured. Turner checked the ground around them. No prints, not ours, not anything. He looked at me, eyes hard. "We're not alone out here." By morning, I reported it to Mason. He inspected the crates himself, then the perimeter. No signs of entry, no broken chem lights, no disturbance beyond the boxes. He told us to stay sharp and logged it in his notebook without further comment. But I saw the way Dalton watched the tree line that morning, silent and tense, like he was waiting for something to move. The second day, we ran patrols in pairs. Turner and I swept the eastern ridge while Mason and Cole checked the lower trails. Reed stayed at camp with Dalton, maintaining watch and inventory. By midday, Turner found something that made my stomach twist. We were following an old game trail when he stopped abruptly, crouching low. In the mud beside a fallen log, he pointed out a series of small impressions, not animal tracks, not boot prints either. They were footprints, but impossibly small, maybe 6 inches long, narrow, with 5 distinct toes. The stride was short, but purposeful, leading from the ridge down toward our camp. Turner traced the outline with his knife. "These are fresh, maybe a few hours old." I looked around, scanning the brush. "Kids?" He shook his head. "No kid walks barefoot out here. Not in this terrain." We followed the trail for another 100 yards before it vanished into a rocky patch where the ground gave no sign. Turner marked the location on his GPS and radioed Mason. The lieutenant told us to return to camp and report in person. When we got back, Reed looked pale. He'd been on watch alone while Dalton checked the radio antenna. He said he'd heard something moving through the brush on the northern side, low and fast, like someone crawling. He'd called out twice. No response. When Dalton returned, They'd swept the area together and found nothing but a pile of small stones, stacked in a neat cairn just outside the chem light perimeter. Dalton stared at the stones for a long time. Then he looked at Mason. "We're being watched," he said quietly, "and they want us to know it." That night, the tension broke. Around 2,100 hours, while we sat around the fire cleaning weapons, the radio hissed to life. Cole had it tuned to our primary frequency, scanning for any traffic from command. What came through wasn't command. It was laughter, faint, distorted, almost childlike. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, then cut to static. Cole adjusted the squelch, checked the batteries, switched channels. Same thing. The laughter followed, always just beneath the noise, like it was burrowed into the signal itself. Reed stood up, eyes wide. "What the hell was that?" Mason told him to sit down, but I saw the way his hand tightened on his rifle. Cole kept cycling through frequencies, trying to isolate the source. Every channel carried the same faint echo. It wasn't interference. It was deliberate. Dalton walked to the edge of camp, staring into the dark. After a moment, he spoke without turning around. "They're testing us," he said, "seeing how we react." Mason asked who they were. Dalton didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low, almost reverent. "The old people used to talk about them. The Yunwi Tsunsdi, the little people. Cherokee legends say they live in the deep hollows, places humans aren't supposed to go. They don't kill. They just push you out." Reed laughed nervously. "You serious, Sergeant?" Dalton turned to face him. His expression was stone. "Dead serious, Private. And if I'm right, we've got about 2 more nights before they stop being polite." The fire crackled. The radio hissed. And somewhere out in the trees, I swear I heard footsteps, small and light, circling just beyond the edge of the light. The third morning, we woke to find our boots rearranged. Not stolen, not damaged, just moved. Each pair had been taken from outside our tents and placed in a perfect line along the edge of the fire pit, laces tied in identical knots. The spacing between them was exact, measured down to the inch. Reed was the first to notice. He stood there staring, rifle slack in his hands, face drained of color. "I locked my tent flap," he whispered. "I know I did." Mason inspected each boot, checking for tampering. No cuts, no foreign objects, nothing disturbed except the placement. He looked at Dalton, who nodded slowly. "They came into camp," Dalton said, "while we slept." Cole's voice cracked. "How the hell did none of us hear anything?" No one had an answer. We'd been running 2-man watch rotations all night. Turner and I had third watch, 0200 to 0400. I'd been scanning the perimeter every 10 minutes. I never saw a movement, never heard a sound. Yet somehow, between shifts, someone had entered our camp, removed 6 pairs of boots from 3 separate tents, and arranged them like a message. Mason called a full inventory check. Every piece of equipment was accounted for, nothing missing, nothing broken. But when we opened the ammo crates to verify counts, we found something that made my blood run cold. The ammunition boxes inside had been sorted, every round removed from its cardboard sleeve and organized by caliber, then by year of manufacture, arranged in neat rows inside the crate. It would have taken hours. We'd checked those same crates the night before, everything standard packed, nothing disturbed. Turner ran his hand over the rows of bullets, face tight. "This isn't random. This is intelligent." Mason radioed command for guidance. The signal was weaker than the day before, breaking up every few seconds. When he finally got through, the response was brief and unhelpful. "Continue mission. Document all anomalies. Maintain position." Reed started pacing. "They want us to keep documenting. We're sitting ducks out here." Dalton put a hand on his shoulder, firm but calm. "They're not trying to hurt us, son. If they wanted us dead, we'd be dead. This is something else. Then what? Reed's voice was rising. What do they want? Dalton looked toward the tree line, eyes distant. They want us to leave. We spent the rest of the day fortifying the perimeter. Tripwires, noise traps, extra chem lights pushed out 20 yards in every direction. Cole rigged motion sensors to his radio setup, hoping to catch any approach. Turner marked sight lines and established fallback positions. We were preparing for an enemy we couldn't see, couldn't predict, couldn't even confirm was real. But the evidence was there. The boots, the bullets, the cairns that kept appearing at random intervals around camp, always just outside our markers, always built from stones that didn't belong to the area. Smooth river rock in a forest with no nearby water. That afternoon, while Mason and Cole were checking the radio antenna up the ridge, I took a walk with Turner to clear my head. We followed the creek bed south, boots sinking into soft mud. The water ran clear and cold, cutting through slate and old timber. About half a mile from camp, we found something that stopped us both. Carved into the trunk of a massive oak, maybe 8 feet up, was a symbol. 3 concentric circles with lines radiating outward, crude but deliberate. The cuts were fresh, sap still bleeding from the bark. Below it, another symbol, a hand with 6 fingers, each digit carefully defined. Turner took photos with his phone. You know what this means? I shook my head. Cherokee warning markers, he said quietly. Old style. The circles mean boundary. The hand means those who watch. I looked around, scanning the trees. You think they carved this? I think someone who knows the old ways carved it. Someone who wants us to understand we're trespassing. We followed the creek farther and found more carvings, some on trees, others scratched into flat stones. All of them variations of the same message. Turn back, leave, do not proceed. The farther we went, the more frequent they became, until every tree within sight bore some mark. Turner stopped at a bend in the creek where the water pooled dark and still. He crouched, studying the mud along the bank. Then he motioned me over. Dozens of small footprints covered the area, overlapping and chaotic, like a group had gathered there recently. The prints were the same as before, narrow, 5-toed, impossibly small. But there was something else. Beside the footprints, pressed into the mud, were handprints. 4 fingers, no thumb, each one distinct, purposeful. Jesus Christ, I muttered. Turner stood slowly, scanning the opposite bank. We need to get back to camp, now. We moved fast, keeping to the ridge trail. The sun was dropping behind the western mountains, throwing long shadows through the trees. Every snapped twig, every rustle in the brush made us flinch. By the time we reached camp, my heart was hammering. Mason listened to our report without interruption. When we finished, he opened his field notebook and wrote for a long time. Then he looked at Dalton. Your assessment, Sergeant. Dalton sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle with slow, deliberate strokes. We're in their territory. They've made that clear. The carvings, the footprints, all of it is communication. They're telling us to leave before they escalate. Escalate how? Dalton met his eyes. I don't know, sir, but I'd rather not find out. Mason nodded. We'll hold position tonight and reassess at dawn. If command doesn't authorize extraction, we move to the fallback point on the southern ridge. That night, none of us slept. We sat in shifts around the fire, watching the darkness press against our small circle of light. The forest had gone silent again, that same unnatural stillness that swallowed sound. The only noise was the crackle of burning wood and the occasional hiss from Cole's radio. Around midnight, Reed whispered that he heard something. We all stopped, straining to listen. At first, nothing. Then it came again. Faint tapping, rhythmic, like knuckles on wood. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing through the hollow. Turner grabbed his night vision and scanned the tree line. I've got movement, multiple contacts, low profile, moving laterally. Mason moved beside him. How many? Can't tell. They're small. Really small, maybe 2 feet tall. Cole's radio crackled to life. The same laughter from before, but louder now, clearer. It wasn't childlike anymore. It was mocking. Reed raised his rifle. Do we engage? Hold fire. Mason's voice cut through the tension. Do not engage unless directly threatened. The tapping grew louder, faster, surrounding us. Through the night vision, I could see shapes moving between the trees, darting from trunk to trunk with unnatural speed. They were coordinated, working in patterns, always staying just beyond effective range. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The tapping ceased. The radio went quiet. The shapes vanished into the forest. We stood there, weapons raised, breathing hard, waiting for the next move. It came at dawn. When the sun broke through the canopy, we found the perimeter destroyed. Every chem light had been removed from its stake and arranged in a massive circle around our camp, twice the size of our original perimeter. Inside that circle, drawn in ash from our own fire pit, was a perfect replica of the hand symbol we'd seen carved into the oak. 6 fingers, each one pointing toward a different tent. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what sat in the center of the symbol. Our flag. The small American flag Mason had planted beside his tent. It had been carefully removed, folded in precise military fashion, and placed in the exact center of the ash hand. No one spoke for a long time. We just stood there, staring at the message laid out before us. It was unmistakable. They'd entered our camp again while we kept watch. They'd moved among us, unseen and unheard, and left a warning we couldn't ignore. Mason's jaw tightened. He keyed his radio, voice steady despite the tension. Command, this is Blue Hollow Detail. Requesting immediate extraction. Situation has escalated beyond original parameters. Static answered. He tried again. Same result. Cole checked the equipment, swapped batteries, adjusted the antenna. The radio was functional. The signal just wasn't getting through. Dalton stood at the edge of the ash circle, looking down at the folded flag. They're jamming us, cutting us off. That's impossible, Cole said. We're on military frequency. They don't need equipment, Dalton interrupted. This place does things to signals. Always has. Old-timers used to say the hollows eat radio waves. Mason made a decision. Pack it up. We're moving to higher ground. If we can't get a signal here, we'll find a spot that works. We broke camp in under 20 minutes, moving with military efficiency despite the exhaustion. Every man kept his rifle ready, eyes scanning the forest. The path up to the southern ridge was steep and narrow, forcing us into single file. Turner took point, I covered rear, Mason in the middle with Cole and the radio pack. About halfway up, Turner raised his fist. We froze. He pointed ahead, then slowly lowered himself into a crouch. I moved forward carefully, following his sight line. Blocking the trail, arranged in a neat row across our path, were dozens of small spears, each one maybe 2 feet long, sharpened to fine points, driven into the ground at identical angles. They formed a barrier, a clear message: do not pass. Turner reached out slowly and touched one. It didn't move. The wood was hard, fire-cured, expertly crafted. He looked back at Mason and shook his head. We can't go this way. Mason studied the barrier, then the surrounding terrain. The ridge was too steep to flank. The only other route would take us miles out of our way, deeper into the hollow. We go over, he said finally. We moved carefully, stepping between the spears without disturbing them. Every man held his breath. I was halfway across when I saw them. Standing in the brush, maybe 30 yards upslope, 3 figures, small and motionless, watching us. I couldn't make out details. They were too far, too deep in shadow. But I could see their outlines. Human-shaped, but compressed, compact. They stood perfectly still, not hiding, just observing. Contact, I said quietly. Upslope, 11 o'clock. Mason saw them too. He raised his hand in what I think was meant to be a peaceful gesture. The figures didn't respond. They just watched as we crossed their barrier, one by one. When the last of us cleared the spears, they turned and melted into the forest without a sound. Reed was shaking. "Did you see their faces?" "No," I lied. But I had. For just a moment, as the light shifted, I'd seen one of them clearly. The face was human, but wrong. Too angular, too sharp, with eyes that reflected light like an animal's. We reached the ridge by late morning. The signal improved enough for Mason to get a partial message through to command. He reported the situation in clipped, professional terms: equipment tampering, psychological pressure, possible hostile contact. He requested extraction within 24 hours. The response came garbled, breaking up every few words. But the essential message was clear. Hold position, support en route, ETA unknown. Dalton laughed, a bitter sound. Support en route. That could mean tomorrow or next week. Mason didn't argue. He just told us to establish a defensive position and prepare for a long wait. We found a rocky outcrop with good visibility and limited approaches, set up watch positions, and rationed our remaining supplies. That afternoon, while Cole tried to boost the radio signal, Turner and I did a perimeter sweep. We found more carvings, more cairns, more of those impossibly small footprints. The signs were everywhere now, like the forest itself was covered in warnings. But we also found something else. Caught in a thorn bush maybe 50 yards from our position was a strip of fabric. Military issue, same pattern as our uniforms. It was torn, not cut, like it had been ripped away in a struggle. Turner held it up to the light. "This is fresh. No weathering, no fading." I checked my own uniform. Intact. So was Turner's. We radioed back to camp. Everyone accounted for, no missing gear. "Then whose is it?" I asked. Turner didn't answer. He just folded the fabric carefully and put it in his pocket. But I saw the look in his eyes. He knew what I was thinking. If the fabric wasn't ours, then someone else had been here. Recently. And whatever happened to them, it hadn't ended well. As the sun began to set, we gathered on the outcrop and watched the hollow below fill with shadow. The forest looked endless from up here, a dark sea of trees stretching toward distant mountains. Somewhere down there, in that maze of laurel and stone, they were watching us, waiting to see what we would do next. Reed spoke quietly. "What happens if support doesn't come?" No one answered, because we all knew. We'd have to walk out, and they'd be waiting every step of the way. Night fell fast on the ridge. We kept a cold camp, no fire, no lights beyond the faint glow of our nods. Mason established a tight watch rotation, 2 men up at all times, everyone else sleeping in full gear with weapons within arm's reach. The temperature dropped hard after sunset, our breath misting in the air. I could see it hanging there, illuminated faintly by the starlight that barely penetrated the canopy above. The cold wasn't just physical, it settled into your bones, made your fingers stiff, made every movement deliberate. Reed kept rubbing his hands together, trying to maintain circulation. Cole had wrapped himself in his poncho liner, looking more like a refugee than a soldier. None of us had expected to be out this long. Our cold weather gear was back at base, along with proper rations and communications equipment. We were making do with what we'd packed for a 5-day sweep, now stretching into our 4th night with dwindling supplies. I took first watch with Dalton. We sat back to back on the rocky ledge, scanning opposite approaches. The forest below was invisible, swallowed by darkness so complete it felt solid. The only sound was wind moving through the canopy, a low rushing that never quite stopped. I found myself counting seconds between gusts, trying to establish a pattern, trying to predict the next surge of cold air that would make my eyes water. Anything to keep my mind occupied, to keep from thinking about what might be moving down there in the dark. Dalton was quiet for the first hour, just methodically scanning his sector, adjusting his night vision every few minutes to prevent eye strain. Standard procedure, but I could feel the tension in his back where it pressed against mine. The way his breathing had changed from steady and calm to shallow and alert. Around 2,200 hours, Dalton spoke quietly. "You know why they're doing this?" I kept my eyes on my sector. "Doing what?" "All of it. The rearranging, the symbols, the barriers. They're not trying to scare us. They're teaching us." I glanced back at him. "Teaching us what?" "That we're not in control. That this place has rules we don't understand." He paused. "The Cherokee used to leave offerings in these hollows. Tobacco, beads, things of value. Not because they were afraid, but because they understood balance. You take from the forest, you give back. You enter their territory, you ask permission." "We didn't ask," I said. "No, we didn't." His voice was heavy. "And they're showing us what happens when you ignore the old ways." Before I could respond, movement caught my eye. Down the slope, maybe 100 yards out, lights appeared. Dozens of them, small and pale, bobbing through the trees like lanterns. They moved in formation, weaving between trunks, rising and falling with the terrain. I tapped Dalton's shoulder. He turned, following my sight line, and went rigid. "Foxfire," he whispered. "They're using foxfire." The lights came closer, spreading out in a wide arc that curved around our position. Through my enods, I could see figures carrying them. Small shapes, moving with purpose, coordinating their approach with military precision. They weren't attacking. They were surrounding us. Dalton keyed his radio, voice calm. "All positions. We have movement. Multiple contacts forming perimeter. Stand ready but hold fire." Mason and Cole scrambled to the edge, weapons up. Reed and Turner took the eastern approach. We waited, watching the lights tighten around us like a noose. Then they stopped. The figures stood motionless at the edge of the effective range, holding their lights steady. In the green glow of my night vision, I could finally see them clearly. They were small, just as we'd suspected, maybe 3 feet tall, compact and muscular, built like humans compressed into smaller frames. Their faces were sharp-featured, angular, with large eyes that reflected light like mirrors. They wore simple clothing, something like woven bark or hide, and each one carried a spear or staff twice their height. There had to be 40 of them, maybe more, all standing silent, all watching us. Reed's voice cracked on the radio. "Sir, what do we do?" Mason didn't answer right away. He just stood there, staring at the ring of lights, the ring of watchers. Finally, he spoke. "We wait. If they wanted to attack, they would have by now." The standoff lasted maybe 10 minutes, though it felt like hours. My finger never left my trigger guard. My heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. The figures didn't move, didn't speak, just held their lights and waited. Then, from somewhere deeper in the forest, a sound rang out, a single sharp whistle, high and clear. The figures responded immediately. They turned as one and began moving back into the trees, lights receding, formation dissolving. Within seconds, they were gone. The forest went dark again. Dalton lowered his rifle slowly. "That was a warning. Last chance to leave." "Or what?" Reed asked. "Or they stopped being polite." No one slept after that. We spent the night in full alert, rotating watch every hour to keep everyone sharp. The radio stayed quiet except for occasional bursts of static. Cole kept trying to raise command, cycling through every frequency, but the interference was worse now, almost like something was actively blocking us. Dawn came gray and cold. Fog rolled up from the hollow, thick enough to cut visibility to maybe 20 yards. We gathered our gear, moving stiff and exhausted, and Mason made his call. "We're walking out. South Ridge Trail, staying high, moving fast. We'll punch through to the ranger station and call for pickup from there." No one argued. We formed up in a tight column. Turner on point, me pulling rear security, Mason in the middle with the radio and the case containing all our documentation. Every photograph, every note, every piece of evidence we'd collected. Command would want proof, and we had plenty. The trail down was treacherous. Loose slate and wet leaves made every step uncertain. We moved slowly, testing each foothold, watching for tripwires or barriers. The fog pressed close, muffling sound, making it impossible to see more than a few yards ahead. About a mile down, Turner stopped. He'd found another line of spears across the trail. This one was different. Larger, more aggressive, each spear topped with what looked like carved bone. And behind the barrier, barely visible through the fog, I could see them. Dozens of small figures, standing motionless, blocking our path. Mason moved forward carefully, stopping maybe 10 feet from the barrier. He lowered his rifle, holding his hands out, palms open. I watched the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept his movements slow and deliberate. This wasn't the Lieutenant Mason from the briefing room back at Campbell. This was someone who'd been humbled by something he couldn't control, couldn't outmaneuver with tactics or firepower. When he spoke, his voice was steady, respectful. "We're leaving. We understand this is your territory. We mean no disrespect." Silence. The figures didn't move. Through my scope, I could see them more clearly now. Their faces weren't hostile, exactly, just impassive, like they were weighing every word Mason said against some internal measure we couldn't understand. I noticed their weapons weren't raised. The spears were held vertically, butts grounded, in what might have been a ceremonial stance rather than an aggressive one. Then, from the center of their line, one stepped forward, older than the others, I thought, though it was hard to tell. The features were more weathered, the movements more deliberate, carrying an authority that made the others step back without being told. It carried a staff wrapped with what looked like feathers and small bones that rattled softly with each step. When it struck the staff against the ground 3 times, the sound echoed like thunder, reverberating through the hollow in a way that defied natural acoustics. It spoke. The language was nothing I'd ever heard, sharp and rhythmic, almost musical, with consonants that seemed to click and hiss in patterns that felt ancient. It spoke for maybe 30 seconds, gesturing once toward us, once toward the valley behind, once toward the sky. I found myself holding my breath, straining to understand not just the words, but the tone, the intention behind them. Then it stopped. The other figures began striking their spears against the ground in unison, creating a deep drumming that vibrated through my chest, through the rock beneath my feet, like the mountain itself was joining their chorus. Reed shifted nervously behind me, and I heard the click of his safety coming off. I keyed my radio quickly. "Hold fire, Reed. Do not engage." The last thing we needed was someone panicking and turning this into a bloodbath. Dalton stepped up beside Mason. "Sir, I think I understand some of this." "Go ahead, Sergeant." "They're saying we brought metal and fire into their sacred ground. We didn't ask permission, didn't show respect. They've given us chances to leave with honor. This is the last one." He paused, listening as the drumming continued. "They're also saying something else. Something about balance. About taking without giving. About men who came before us who refused to listen." Miller, I thought. They were talking about Miller's team. Mason nodded slowly. Then he did something that surprised all of us. He unslung his rifle, set it on the ground, and stepped forward with his hands empty. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small military challenge coin, the kind officers carry. He held it out toward the elder figure. "This is all I have to offer," he said quietly, "as a sign of respect, for allowing us to leave in peace." The elder watched him for a long moment. Then it stepped forward, moving with a strange grace, and took the coin. It turned the metal over in its hands, studying it, then looked back at Mason. It spoke again, shorter this time, and the drumming stopped. The figures parted, opening a gap in their line. The barrier of spears remained, but a path had been cleared beside it. The message was obvious. Go now. Don't return. We moved through quickly, single file, eyes forward. None of us looked back. As I passed the elder, I felt its eyes on me, studying me with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. It didn't feel hostile anymore. It felt ancient, patient, tired of dealing with trespassers who didn't understand the rules. The trail opened up about half a mile farther on. The fog thinned, the terrain leveled out, and suddenly we could see the ranger station in the distance, maybe 2 miles away. Reed actually laughed, a short burst of relief. We'd made it. But Turner held up his fist. We stopped. He was staring at something on the ground beside the trail. Another pile of stones, arranged in that familiar cairn pattern. On top of it, carefully placed, was the strip of fabric we'd found the day before. And beside that, a dog tag. Mason picked it up slowly, reading the name stamped into the metal. His face went pale. Sergeant Miller, he said quietly, the ranger who went missing 2 months ago. We found the rest of Miller's gear another 100 yards down the trail. His pack, his radio, his weapon, all of it arranged neatly beside the path, like it had been waiting for us to find. The pack was propped against a tree, opened, but not ransacked. The radio sat beside it, antenna extended, as if someone had been trying to call for help, right up until the moment they stopped. The weapon, an M4 carbine, was laid out on a flat stone, completely stripped and cleaned. Every component separated and organized with the same meticulous precision we'd seen with our own ammunition. No sign of Miller himself, no blood, no struggle, no indication of violence. Just his equipment laid out like an offering, or maybe like a museum display, like someone wanted us to see exactly what was left behind when you push too far, when you refuse to respect the warnings. I noticed something else too. Miller's uniform jacket was folded into a perfect square beside his pack, the name tape facing up, the rank insignia carefully aligned. It was the kind of precision you only saw in military funerals, that ceremonial attention to detail that honored the dead. My stomach turned. Whatever happened to Miller, they'd treated his belongings with a respect he apparently hadn't shown them. Dalton crouched beside the pile, searching through the pack with gloved hands, careful not to disturb the arrangement more than necessary. Inside, he found Miller's field journal, wrapped in a plastic bag to keep it dry. The last entry was dated 8 weeks prior. The handwriting was shaky, rushed, with some words scratched out and rewritten. Day 6. They won't let us leave. Every trail leads back to camp. Every attempt to radio for help fails. Jenkins says we should fight our way out. I think that's what they want us to do. I think that's the test. Do we force our way through, or do we learn to respect the boundary? Jenkins doesn't understand. He thinks this is about tactics, about superior firepower. But I'm starting to realize this is about something older, something we weren't trained for. If you're reading this and you're not one of us, then we failed the test. Learn from our mistake. Don't be stubborn. Don't try to prove anything. Just leave. The entry ended there. No conclusion, no final note. Just that question, hanging unanswered, and a warning that came too late to save him, but might save us. Mason closed the journal and stood. We report this to command. All of it. Let them decide what to do. We reached the ranger station by midday. Harlan was there, sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, like he'd been waiting for us. When he saw us coming up the access road, dirty and exhausted, he just nodded. You made it out, he said. Not everyone does. Mason approached slowly. Miller's gear is still out there, about 2 miles up the south trail. You know what happened to him? Harlan took a sip of coffee, staring out at the forest. Miller didn't listen. He pushed when he should have pulled back, tried to prove something. The forests don't like that. These mountains have been here longer than any of us. They've got their own way of doing things. Where is he now? Harlan shrugged. Gone. Some say he walked deeper in, couldn't find his way back. Some say he's still out there, trying to make peace with what he disturbed. I don't know. I just know that every patrol that goes into Blue Hollow comes back different, if they come back at all. We spent the rest of the day debriefing with command over a secure line. Mason filed his report, detailed and professional, documenting every incident, every piece of evidence. He spoke for nearly 3 hours, walking them through the timeline, the escalating contact, the final confrontation. Cole uploaded the photos, hundreds of them, showing the rearranged equipment, the symbols, the footprints, and most damning of all, the clear images of the figures surrounding our position on the ridge. Turner submitted his tracking logs, complete with GPS coordinates and detailed measurements of the footprints, the cairns, the barriers. I gave my statement about the final encounter, the elder, the barrier, the way the challenge coin had been accepted as payment for safe passage. The response was predictable but still frustrating. Skepticism, requests for psychological evaluation, suggestions that we'd experienced shared delusion brought on by stress and isolation. A colonel whose name I never learned told Mason that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that photographs could be explained by various natural phenomena or misidentification. When Mason pointed out that we had physical evidence, Miller's gear, the man simply said it proved Miller had been there, not what happened to him. But they couldn't explain the rearranged equipment, not really. They offered theories about local pranksters, about wildlife, about sleep deprivation causing us to misremember the original placement. They couldn't explain Miller's gear being maintained and displayed with military precision 8 weeks after he vanished. They couldn't explain the photographs showing dozens of small figures standing in military formation, coordinated and disciplined in a way that no local pranksters could achieve. Most of all, they couldn't explain why 6 trained soldiers, with no prior history of mental health issues, would independently corroborate the same impossible story. So they did what the military always does when faced with something that doesn't fit the accepted reality. They classified it. Blue Hollow was marked as a restricted zone, off limits to military personnel, without special authorization from a level so high none of us had ever heard of it. The official story was contaminated groundwater causing hallucinations, a plausible cover that would satisfy anyone who didn't dig too deep. The real story went into a file marked with classifications that would probably keep it buried for 50 years, maybe longer. We were told, in terms that were polite but absolutely clear, that discussing the incident with anyone outside authorized channels would result in immediate prosecution under national security laws. We signed documents that made it clear our careers, our freedom, possibly our lives, depended on our silence. They called it operational security. We called it a cover-up. But we signed anyway, because what choice did we have? Our team was dispersed. Mason transferred to a desk job in Virginia. Cole took early retirement. Turner went back to civilian tracking work in the Smokies. Reed requested reassignment overseas, somewhere far from mountains and forests. Dalton stayed in, but he never talked about what happened. When I ran into him a year later at a training exercise, he just gave me a look that said everything I needed to know. I got out after my contract ended, went to school, got a normal job, tried to forget. But some nights, when the wind picks up and the trees outside my window start swaying, I hear it again, that rhythmic tapping, that distant drumming. And I remember the way those eyes reflected light in the darkness, watching us, judging us, deciding whether we were worth teaching or worth destroying. I drove back to Blue Hollow once, maybe 5 years after the incident. The access gate was sealed, chained, and padlocked, with signs warning about hazardous conditions. But the forest looked the same, dense and dark and endless. I stood there for a while, listening, wondering if they were still out there, wondering if they remembered us. Then I saw it, a small cairn built beside the gatepost, fresh stones carefully stacked. And on top, gleaming in the afternoon sun, was Mason's challenge coin. I didn't touch it. I just got in my truck and drove away. Some places aren't meant for us. Some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed. The mountains keep their secrets, and the little people keep their territory. We were lucky. We learned the lesson before it was too late. We understood that respect isn't weakness and retreat isn't failure. We understood that there are older rules than the ones we follow, older powers than the ones we serve. Miller never learned that. I hope he found peace wherever he ended up. I hope the forest was kind to him in the end. But I doubt it. The last thing I'll say is this. If you ever find yourself deep in the Appalachian backcountry and you start seeing signs you don't understand, symbols carved into trees, small footprints in the mud, equipment rearranged in patterns that make no sense, don't push forward. Don't try to prove anything. Don't test the boundaries. Just turn around, walk out, and don't look back. Because if the Yunwi Tsunsdi decide you're not worth teaching, you'll find out what happens when they stop being polite. And by then, it'll be too late to learn. We walked away with our lives and a story no one believes. That's more than most people get. The mountains remember. The hollows remember. And somewhere deep in Blue Hollow, in the places where the maps go blank and the signals die, they're still watching, still waiting, still testing everyone who thinks they own these hills. They were here first. They'll be here last. And they don't forgive trespassers. That's the truth of it. That's what we brought back from Blue Hollow. Not proof, not evidence, just understanding. The kind of understanding that changes you, makes you respect the dark places, the old places, the places where human rules don't apply. I carry that knowledge every day. And I'll carry it until I'm gone.